So looking at this theme of healing and hope, how can we bring healing and hope? How can we find it for ourselves? These are a couple who I just think they're a wonderful couple. He is from a Jewish background. I think she may be too. So they have something of a heritage of Old Testament wisdom there, which I think comes through, but they basically are scientists and researchers in marriage. And they have asked this question: why do marriages succeed or fail? What makes love last? And they have got couples and they have hooked them up to heart rate monitors and blood pressure measurements, and they have videoed them, and they claim that they can predict with 90% accuracy who will break up and who will stay together within 3 hours, just by watching them and observing them together. And they've done this across many different cultures. So there are certain things that they're seeing in the communication patterns that are alarm signals that show them. Conflict, they say, is not bad, it's just how you do it. That's the critical thing. Conflict is not, all couples conflict because we're different in many different ways. So they talk about, Gottmans talk about the masters and disasters in marriage. And the masters are people who, and here you hear the tones of the fruits of the Spirit, who are gentle and kind, who admit mistakes, who take responsibility, who build appreciation and respect, who show gratitude, who listen well, who have humor and affection, and they know how to soothe themselves and each other. Now you hear the echoes of Pablo's talk in this. The disasters, so let me just say a little bit more maybe about the masters. The masters are very gentle with each other when there are disagreements. They do soft startups. Especially it's important for women to learn to do soft startups. By that I mean they don't immediately get into, "Oh, I hate you! This is such a stupid thing you said." It's being able to gently move into the disagreement. The masters have frequent thoughts of positive aspects of their spouse and minimize focus on the negative aspects. Now, I think there is a real element of choice in that. You can choose to focus on the negative, or you can choose to focus on the positive. And part of the discipline of marriage is not allowing yourself to drift, and this is where slippery slopes come in. You begin to compare with someone else's husband or someone else's wife, and you notice the negative things, rather than keeping your mind on the positive. They know how to soothe and change the subject to distract in a kind and gentle way. And that, of course, brings the physiological arousal down. When your heart starts beating, when you get into an argument, your heart starts beating, your pulse is going, and you're not rational. And you need somehow to slow down and soothe yourself. And the masters are unselfish and concerned for equality and fairness. Now then look at the disasters. They tend to be very critical. They tend to be defensive and blaming. They tend to have a lot of contempt. I love that word contempt because it sort of carries contempt. It's a sort of spitting word, isn't it? And then stonewalling. And they call these the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So once these start to enter into a marriage relationship, you're really in trouble. So a little more about criticism. So, this pattern, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, was the pattern of escalation of conflict that predicted divorce 5.5 years after marriage. So there's a tendency to interpret everything negatively. They don't notice the positive. So criticism is attacking someone's personality or character rather than a specific behavior, usually with blame. Airing a complaint, if done properly, is a good thing. So there's a skill in learning how to air a complaint rather than just be critical. So the husband is not calling home when he's late, when he's going to be late. And his wife, rather than just laying into him like a bulldozer and criticizing him, might say, I've noticed that when you come home late, you tend not to call. I would love it if you could call me and just let me know so that I can have the meal ready, or we can get ready to get the children to bed, or whatever it is. So, and then the second one is defensiveness and blaming, where both feel blamed and victimized by the other. They deny responsibility. They make excuses. They repeat themselves. So it's sort of meeting criticism with criticism. And as I said earlier, especially if you feel ashamed, I know this is for me, when I feel criticized that I haven't done something, like, I've done the laundry wrong, put something of my wife's clothing in that shouldn't be in the dryer, and she mentions it, I feel hurt, and I tend to feel ashamed, and I tend to attack back. So, and then the third one is contempt, which is perhaps one of the most devastating. The intention to insult and psychologically abuse. Now, you can do this just when someone says something to you and you raise an eyebrow, or you have a sneer on your face, or you just say nothing and walk out. You can do it in very powerful non-verbal ways, or you can do it in very powerful verbal ways. And you're always so lazy. You're always so untidy. It's those never always. You never do this. You always do that. So the disasters are scanning for mistakes. They're irritable and annoyed all the time. And then the fourth one then is the stonewalling, which is the sort of withdrawal into silence. You put up a wall. You retreat. You don't engage when someone wants to engage you. And sometimes it may be wise that you don't, and you step away and then you come back and say, can we talk about it later when we're calmer? But the stonewalling is much more a shutting out and not letting someone in. It's punishing them in body language or silence or escape. And men tend to do this more than women because men's hearts tend to go up higher, and they're afraid that they may do some damage. They may hurt their wife, or they may yell. So they tend to hide in their cave, run away. So criticism, defensive and blaming, contempt, stonewalling. Now, the Gottmans also found there's a magic sort of 5-to-1 ratio. For every one critical comment, there need to be at least 5 positives. Now, this is good for parenting. It's good for any relationship. But once the ratio begins to come below 5-to-1, then a marriage is usually in pretty serious trouble. So 5 positive for every 1 negative. They found that it's important to help couples to nurture friendship and intimacy, to be aware of their partner's world, to sit and tell each other stories of their childhood, of their early lives, of their families. Now, good marriages do this naturally, but sometimes some marriages that we see in therapy have never done this, and we actually get them to do it with us, to talk about their early relationships, and to teach them how to be curious and how to be empathic, to help someone to be able to say, that must have been really hard for you when your father died at the age of 3. I've never realized how painful that was and how difficult and how much it affected your life. So the therapist, the counselor, can say that to them, And he can model that for the spouse to be able to learn how to say those things to his spouse. And then building love maps is the language that they use, of bonding and attachment, of fondness and admiration. So sitting down and sharing their dreams for family, for marriage, for the future, for their careers, their hopes, their aspirations. Cultivating, as I said earlier, noticing the good things, not the bad things in the relationship, and avoiding the slippery slope of the danger of comparisons with other people's spouses. And helping them to share humor together, to be able to be grateful to each other, to learn the simple things of thank you for cooking that delicious meal, thank you for making the bed, thank you for doing the laundry, whatever it is the other person has done. We need to cultivate the habit of gratitude because that nurtures the fondness in the relationship. And we've talked about the hugging, the physical touch, and how important that is, and especially without the expectation of sex. There are many women who think their husband only touches them, kisses them, hugs them when he wants sex, so they tend to avoid because they may not be ready for it then. But to be able to hug, and they say that if you hug for 3 minutes, the level of oxytocin and other bonding hormones actually goes up. So it's not just a quick, love you, see you, but actually to hold each other for 3 minutes at least. Or kisses should last at least 10 seconds. I mean, good kisses, not just a peck on the cheek. But that all helps the hormones, the oxytocin and other things to be released. And there's an interesting, there's a hormone called vasopressin, which especially in men, when it's fairly high, makes them possessive and jealous, which there's good jealousy, isn't there? There's good possessiveness that makes you protective and want to work at the marriage, hopefully. There's also bad jealousy, which is a whole nother thing. And then creating shared meaning together. The rituals, the holidays, the celebrations. And I say all these things because what these marriage researchers have found is that couples nowadays need a lot of coaching in how to do this. They haven't seen it in their parents doing it. The parents may have been divorced, so they've never seen a good marriage. They're cynical about marriage. They need coaching in these simple but profound relational skills. So, the Gottmans talk about, when they talk about managing conflict, they say that in most marriages, or all marriages, have a major area of disagreement somewhere in the marriage, that they find it very difficult to resolve, and they have to learn just to accept the difference and live with it. They have to be helped to build trust and to be trustworthy to each other. So trust is about reliability and safety and security. It's not just a nice feeling of love. So you might ask someone, do you love your spouse? And then do you trust them? And they quite often, they might say yes to the first, but do they trust them? Well, there are some areas often where they don't really trust. So you have to work on those. And of course, people who have come, as so many people have, from broken families, where there have been damaged trust in early relationships, have a very hard time building trust in their marriages. So they have to, but marriage can be a profound place of healing of that early damage as well. So another person, just as I'm getting near the end here, a woman called Sue Johnson, who actually has written a book. I don't think she's a Christian, but she's written a book with a Christian on marriage therapy specifically for Christians. But her a model of marriage called emotionally focused therapy, I think is one of the most powerful and fairly straightforward ways of helping. We teach all our counseling students this model. But what she does, this is just so brief that it's frustrating for you and me, but she is trying to define and see the demon dialogues. So you have an argument with your spouse about how you're going to get to a certain restaurant. And I might ask you as a therapist, when you come in, tell me what happened in that argument. Unpack it for me. Tell me from the very moment you began to the moment you ended, and then we will slow it down and we will talk through every little thing and what it made you. So when your husband said this, you felt really hurt and rejected and sad, and what did you do then? And she lashed out. So you're uncovering the fact that underneath hard emotions of anger and criticism and contempt, there are often deep longings for love and affection, and there's deep sadness and hurt. So you don't take the anger and contempt at face value, you look underneath it and help people to see this. So she talks about naming the cycle, the defensive, negative dance they get into, and helping them to put words to their own and their spouse's emotions. So it's helping them to be empathic with each other, naming and revisiting the raw spots, the wounds. There may be ways in which they've really hurt each other way back in the relationship, and maybe there was a betrayal, maybe there was pornography. And they have to go back and revisit that and enter into a process of confession and forgiveness and sharing of what it did to them. So it's putting words to fears and longings. There's a sense of mutual repentance and forgiveness. And it's learning to delight in your spouse. So this is where I think the Gottmans and Sue Johnson have done us a great service in the sense of just affirming through scientific research that the Bible really is true. It fits reality. And we need not be afraid to use some of these methods so they're just sort of unpacking, how do you do this for couples whose marriages have really broken down? And your aim is that the marriage should be a secure base and a safe haven. That's her language. A safe haven for both of them. And of course, there is always a danger of idolatry in marriage, that we try to get all our needs met through our spouse, needs that should be met maybe with friends, needs that should be met in relation to God, but we put it all on our spouse, and that's a dangerous place to be. And I finish here with Ecclesiastes 4:12, that verse that speaks of a three-stranded cord that is not easily broken. A three-stranded cord is a symbol of completeness in Scripture, but it's also a symbol, I think, of us not putting all the weight of our expectations of marriage on a two-part relationship. Without God in it, without prayer, without asking for His help, our marriages are going to founder and collapse.